We'll get started. Om. 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 Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavit Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we can all chant all of them together.
Okay.
Today. Okay.
So we can mute ourselves.
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Muninam Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Vritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusantatami Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshini Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Phulla Ravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamayah Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Geetamrutatuhe Namaha Vasudev. Oh, I'm sorry. I think, 1 second, let me change the. No, correct. It is correct only. Sarvopanishado gavaha dogda gopalanandanaha partho vatsa sudhir bhokta duktam geetamrutam mahat vasudeva sutam devam kamsa chanuramardanam devaki paramanandam krishnam vande jagadgurum भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पाण्डवैरणनदी कैवत्रकः केशवः पाराशर्यवचः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेसरं हरिकदा सम्बोधना बोधितम् लोके सज्जनषट्पदैरहरः पेपीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमल प्रध्वंसिनः श्रेयसे मूखं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम् यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यैस्तवैः वेदैः साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदैः गायन्ति यं सामगाः ध्यानावस्थिततत्कटेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनः यस्यान्तं न विदुः सुरासुरगणाः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः सर्वधर्मान् परित्यज्य मामेकं शरणं व्रज अहं त्वा सर्वपापेभ्यः मोक्षयिष्यामि मा शुचः. Share the other one. So today we are starting off with the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. So having completed the 13th chapter, the 14th chapter starts off, is also part of the last, the third. We had talked about how Bhagavad Gita is divided into three parts. So 14th chapter is, on the same theme, focusing on specifically the Jnana Yoga or self-knowledge. And you will see that in all these chapters, and specifically the 13th, 14th, and the 15th, it is specifically on this Jnana Yoga. And all these three chapters are very important. And this particular one is very important because it really gives us a lot of pointers on who we are in terms of our personalities. What is really the qualities of each one of us, and how does that affect us whenever we face any issue. So this is where this particular chapter really becomes. So it's all about the gunas, the sattva, rajas, and tamas gunas, which you all are very familiar with in terms of the context, right? And in the last chapter, the knowledge of our higher nature. So, as we have talked about before, we all have, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde personalities, right? Although Jekyll and Hyde really means the two kind of a uh, bipolar kind of personalities within the same individual. But for us, we believe we are the two type of individualities based on what is the higher nature of us and the lower nature of us. It is the lower nature of us through which we are interacting in the whole world. But in truth, in reality, this is only a role that we are all playing. In truth, and in reality, we are actually the higher nature, the higher principle. So the Kshetrajna, or we call this as the witness principle. So this is what we have learned so far from the third chapter. And if we were to think about connecting this to one of the Prakarana Granthas called Drig Drishya Vivek, so anything that is observed, anything that we are able to observe through our eyes, ears, everything, touch, feel. In fact, I mean, recently only yesterday I was listening to a reel by another Swami, who said, the minute I say anything is this, this is a cup, this is a book, this is something, including this is a thought. Okay. If we were to say something like that, everything is in the field of what we would call as drishyam, right? So drishyam, whereas, and that all this is part of that kshetram or the field, or we also use another term which is called as prakriti in chapter 3, in chapter 13. So all this is, connected to drishyam or prakriti or anything that is observed is all the kshetrajna. So what is kshetra? Kshetra is the consciousness which makes all this kshetram come alive, right? So, in order to get to really what my true nature is, I can use this method, which is not this, not this. So we said, am I the cup? No, I'm not the cup. Am I the eye which is seeing the cup? No, I'm not the eye. The eye is only an instrument using the cup. Then, am I the mind that is using the eye to see the cup? No, I'm also not the mind, because I can know how my mind is functioning. I can say that sometimes, I'm sad, I'm lonely, all this. Where are all these emotions residing? It is in the mind, right? So I'm not the mind also. So what am I? So I'm actually beyond the mind. So this kind of a neti neti method is also something that can be used in order to finally understand what my higher nature is. So this is the part that, uh, to a large extent, we learned in the 13th chapter. So in the 14th chapter, which is called Guna Atita Vibhaga Yoga, we are, to some extent, taking this further, but we are truly trying to understand what this anatma is. Because, as I said earlier, the atma is something that we can come to by this neti neti principle. So it is this atma which is functioning through this matter, through this matter, and making it come alive with all the experiences in the world. Okay. So we know, I mean, many of us who are students of science and engineering and all of this, we know that the world of matter is really actually even uniformly the same everywhere. In the sense, all these minerals and non-minerals, the metals and the non-metals, they're all really formed from the same elements in the periodic table, right? So they all in some combination are the same also. And uh, basically, our Mahatmas have said that, this particular spirit, or this particular enlivening principle, we say, they vitalize this matter and make it very dynamic, right? So we know that it is really the one truth expressing through this matter, which is also, you might look at it as one big homogeneous mass which has been divided into so many different parts. And this particular consciousness principle working through all this matter, enlivens it, right? So all these varieties are also the same here. So now let us try to really understand what is it then about this matter. Why is it different? Why is it behaving different if indeed it is also made up of all just the same elements? So the question that, again, I always put this reflection, what does this mean really? Why do I need to even worry about all this? What do I get out of knowing all this, right? So, what one thing which is very important that we can get out of this is really from this 14th chapter, which is a very, very practical chapter. It is a small chapter, there's only about 27 shlokas. The most critical thing which we will really understand here is how do we understand that we are actually made of these gunas, and how do these gunas really influence us? What are the most powerful tendencies that really arises in our mental life at any given moment? These gunas, the role of it, and how does it really affect us? And this is something, we really want to understand this, right? So having said that, matter is very homogeneous, the consciousness principle is also there's only one, then, somebody may ask this question, why are there so many varieties in this world? you know, Forget about the fact that, even if you take something like stones, stones are so many, but they are in all different shapes and sizes. Okay, that is fine. What about all of us human beings? We are also different shapes, sizes, colors, all that, right? And then take the different mangoes. The mango season is almost over here. Actually, it is already over. They also different varieties, different shapes, sizes, etc. So there are all these are there, but we are not bothered really if there are all these shapes and sizes, right? We know that matter is one, and the five elements, the panchama, like I said, panchatanmatras, and also on top of that, if we take, let's take specifically our human beings, the mind, intellect, equipment, all this is the same for everyone, right? But among human beings, there are so many varieties. One is a very decent guy, another one is not a decent guy, one is very noble, and the other one is not noble. One is very honest, the other one is dishonest. One is very loyal, the other one. So one is, so all this, we see this same human beings who are different, this one. It really is something is different about all this. What is it that makes all of them behave differently? That is the key part of it, which we're trying to address here. Why are people behaving differently? They all are, after all, made of the same matter. They all are this one, right? So just like, for example, I have two examples here, one is this one, which is, we know that electricity is one. The structure of these bulbs, if you look at all this, they are one. The body of the bulb, just like a human being, with having a mind, intellect, and all the five elements. Here too, you have the anode, cathode, filament. All this are the same equipment that is needed. But yet, no two bulbs of the same light, different light. And this one is the same. They are different. The intensity is different. So too, among human beings, the black, the white, all of them, we all are very different, right? So why is this difference? What is this relationship between, uh, if you take this example, electricity, what is the relationship between the electricity that is flowing in and the the constituent of the matter, that interaction of these things, what is it that is really different? So this is something, is a main question in the mind of somebody like Arjuna, who's a very intelligent person, right? And this other example, so too, Swamiji in his book, actually, this example I took directly from the book, which is, even if you have something like Ganga water, okay, and you put the Ganga water in, all the Ganga water, which is so divine, and which is, it's straight the Ganges water coming from all the way up from Gangotri, if we were to put this in the various bottles, we find that these bottles, we look at the same Ganges water by the shape and size of these bottles here, right? So these the colored bottles, they really they give a different, uh, uh, maybe we can think about sometimes a different flavor to the Ganges water itself, So too for all of us, this consciousness which is expressing ourselves through our own individuals, each one of us, appears to be very different. And why is that? Well, the answer is simple, and it is because of the composition of these three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, which creates the difference in our behaviors. And here I have these three gunas taken from this one website. Um, so we have, sattva, which is, uh, the behavioral characteristics are balance and harmony and kindness, openness, clarity, intelligence, awareness, wellness, inspiration. And we can put even more qualities like, wanting to do only good things and always looking at the goodness in everyone. All these are sattva. And then we have in rajas, which is by we can qualify this by the energy. Okay, so it rajas, gives a lot of energy. It propels someone to act, so a lot of activity, and then a lot of passion, a lot of dynamism, and along with this, also the other things of having a high amount of ego, always in a state of agitation, excitement, movement, attachment. that doesn't mean that there are only three types of people. It is not that there's three types of people. We have the combinations of people, combination of these gunas in everybody. Okay. And then finally, tamas is something which is, the quality probably you can say is darkness, but it gives rise to inertia, inactivity, heaviness, laziness, stability, insentience, obstruction, and also looking at something and then having a completely different view of it. So all that is the tamas part of it. So this is the aspect, these influences that actually provide a very distinct flavor for all of us in our personality. So these three are there in every being and in just different proportions, right? So, Bhagavad Gita, being a text which is a sign of self perfection, has to be extremely logical in this development of the theme of how these gunas are affecting. So, this is the part where we will see that how the three gunas function in each other, and therefore, we as a seeker, we need to know how to uh, how how these gunas are affecting us. For example, if I find that I'm in a certain situation and my mind is, looking at this in a little negatively, uh, if there is a way for me to detach myself from the mind and look at the same situation and say, why am I thinking like this? Is this because of one of these gunas which is acting, and why is this particular guna more active at this time? Is it because, it sometimes it comes to as simple as a physical influence in the sense, if I don't have enough sleep, or if I've not eaten the proper kind of food, or if in the just recently I have exposed myself to, say, some people who look at things negatively, maybe all those influences are having an influence on my own mind, and has gotten a certain kind of a guna more active, and because of which I'm I'm acting in a certain way, or I am reacting in a certain way, or I'm even feeling in a certain way. So a careful study of this 14th chapter will now give us a kind of a capacity of detecting within ourselves the most powerful tendencies that are coming within us. And so, if I'm truly a seeker and I'm able to detach myself, then I will be able to recognize what are all these influences under which I'm forced to function in the world, and this happens from time to time. So I will be able to keep a good this one. So, in a sense, this 14th chapter is really an exhaustive book of instructions, which will give us an idea of how to control this. And it's almost like, suppose I'm driving an old car, and if I'm not aware of what the car is all about, then, and if I'm taking it for a really long ride, then I'm in trouble because I don't know what the quality of my car is all about, right? So I need to know really the quality of the thing of my own self through which I'm acting in such a way that I am able to have a good life in this, or I'm able to enjoy my life, or able to really put things in perspective as I'm going through various experiences in this life. So a knowledge of this chapter will really give us that steady progress, and will help us, really help us, since we are all seeking this. So the three main topics in this chapter, it is closely kind of linked with the previous chapter, in the sense, of course, there is more of a discussion, as I've shown here, which is the functioning of the gunas in the mind, which is really the bulk part of it. But the first few shlokas will really talk about, as a kind of an extension from the 13th chapter, on how Purusha and Prakriti are contributing to the creation. What is a combination? And finally, the second part, as I said, which is a bulk there. And the last part is, how do I transcend these gunas and really realize my higher self. So this part of it is what is very important. So it gives here all this aspect of it. Any thoughts so far before we?
Hari Om.
Yes, Meena.
Um, can you give an example for Tamas Guna? What is insentience?
Insentience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sentient means the adjective of sentient, one would say, is something which makes thing alive. Whereas insentient is something which keeps it like a stone, um, where there is no activity at all. That is insentiency. So sentiency is something, is a quality to bring something alive. Like, for example, you see in front of you suddenly a bud, you know, becoming a flower. So there's so much amount of sentiency there.
Okay.
Insentiency is something where, uh, we also say, என்ன இவ்வளோ ஜடமா இருக்க,
Oh, got it. Okay.
that
Okay.
is insentiency.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
So here we have, how the 27 shlokas are listed here. So, in the 13th chapter, we found that our existence, is a result of, why we are, first of all, ignorant of our own true nature, which creates, all this illusory and distinct self, or the lower self of us, which we call this as a jiva, and how this jiva, gets trapped as a result of its attachment to the three gunas of Prakriti. Okay. So having said that, ultimately, the difference between all of us is not the fact that we all look different, are different, like I said, different colors or whatever, but it is basically the inner part of it which makes us different, because of which we react in different ways, right? Which is because of the gunas. So this jiva, is trapped in the physical body because of the attachment to the three gunas of the equipment in which we are in, right? So and this one, so Krishna reveals all this teaching in this 14th chapter. He begins by glorifying first, in the first few verses, this wonderful knowledge, and then he also tells us, of course, the palam, the fruit, the fruit of all our sadhana, which is nothing but moksha, right? He then talks about how this, the sentiency, like we talked about, the awareness, and how this combination of this awareness with this prakriti, this material knowledge, that gives rise to the entire knowledge. So the entire universe. So that is what is shown in the first few verses. And then he talks about how this jiva, the awareness aspect of Isha, which is there in each, identifying with the Prakriti, really results in what we call this as, because of again the influence of the gunas, we become ignorant of our own true nature. We forget about the fact that we are of a higher nature. And because we have forgotten that aspect of the fact that we are of a higher nature, we are continuously born again and again in a variety of different wombs. So that part of it is where, he talks about. Then he takes us through that detailed analysis of Prakriti. In that verse 5 through 9, you will see, he talks about the detailed analysis of Prakriti. So just like how, for example, you have a driver who identifies, suppose, I'm driving a Honda, but then I go to a parking lot after going to Costco or something, and I see this BMW, and I like the BMW, and I want to drive this BMW. Now, is that my car? No, it is not my car. I'm driving just a Honda, right? So if I were to drive a BMW, what will happen? I'm going to suffer the consequences of driving this BMW. First of all, maybe I don't know how to drive it. So that aspect of it is, we identify somehow with something which is not ours, and then we are bound by the characteristics. Then what happens is, I feel that, I am a rich person, I am driving this. So, this is how we have come into this world with a certain set of vasanas and everything. And I'm there to really fulfill what I've come here in this goal. But somewhere along the lines, I get very attracted to something else. And then I feel that I need that, whatever it is. And work hard in this physical life which has been given to me for something else, forgetting what I came into this world for, right? So that part of it, we will discuss a little bit. And why does it happen? I think it is because of the three gunas. Okay. Sattva, which is binding me through, of course, good qualities and all that. Then Rajas, to really this energy of action. And then finally, we have Tamas, right? So Krishna gives the effect of each one of the gunas in that 14.2, 14.3, how all this works. And finally, in this, he gives the effects of all the fruit of each guna. So he gives the effects so that we can understand, our own proportion of gunas, which is here. And I will be going through a little more scientific actually in all this, because I did some projects with my students here and all these gunas. So we will do I'll show you some of that when we are doing this aspect. So then he also talks about what happens after death. For example, our fate after death is also determined actually by the kind of mental state I'm in. And for example, if, just after going through this entire journey of our life, and depending on if I have done enough amount of sadhana towards, as I'm going to finish my term in this body, if my predominant state is sattva, then what kind of life will I lead in the next life? And if it is always sort of materialistic, then I'll probably be born in a very action-oriented family. And if I'm in a tamasic, then that will lead me to take birth in the lower orders of the life itself, right? So, for example, when we take life as from, a small one unicellular organism to a multicellular organism, to say, you have birds and everything, and then you have animals, and then you have the mammals, and then you have a human being. So, depending upon really the state of my mind, um, towards, as I'm leaving this body, or for that matter, even the concentration, I guess, of sattva, rajas, tamas, to that extent, I'll be born in certain kind of those families. So this is how the 27 shlokas are laid out. Okay. So we are coming to the 14th chapter then, where the first four shlokas will be about talking about the highest knowledge, because Arjuna is asking the question, what are the signs of one who has transcended all these three gunas? And Krishna then says that he gives the answer saying that the how what is this, how does that person look like? He says it is one who's not impacted or affected or attached to any of the gunas. So such a person will view the entire universe, in a very different way, in a very detached way. And then again, some amount of the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, which we talked about in chapter 2, how does such a person behave in the world? So Krishna then says about how such a person really, has complete and utter equanimity towards objects, situations, people at all times. And sometimes I think, when we think about ourselves, okay, I've been doing so much of reading, I've been watching so many videos, what change has it really created in me? And the way we can actually look at it is this, like Shlokas 24, 25, balance and equipoise. This is really one measure of our own attitude towards the entire world. So that part. And then in Shloka 26, 27 here, how does one transcend the gunas in practice? So only through single-pointed devotion to Ishvara, since Ishvara is this abode of that ultimate nirguna part of it, Brahman. So, in order to reach that state of Ishvara and the nirguna Brahman, I need to start to detaching myself from this Prakriti, which is, it has a combination of all these gunas, and attaching myself to Ishvara. So this is how, just to give you a flavor of the whole chapter itself. Okay. So, having said that, we can get into the chapter itself. So Krishna, first in this verses 1 to 4, he discusses about how this Prakriti functions in the man. How it functions through the qualities of nature. And then he assures Arjuna that, the knowledge of this gunas will give him really a better understanding of why people are different. So even as, the practical knowledge of this one is when I'm interacting with people in the world, then I will be able to even not only understand how I am behaving, but how somebody else is behaving towards me. You know, if you look at a lot of the psychological or psychology texts, or even people go to therapists and people discuss a lot of these things. Why is to or seek help? Mainly because they themselves are not spending the time to analyze what they are going through. They're seeking the help of a therapist who can give them maybe some advice for just that moment or for that situation. But if we have this knowledge of the sattva, rajas, tamas, not only will we understand others for who they are and why certain conflicts and everything are happening, but also for ourselves, knowing our own nature itself. So I think that is why this chapter is extremely important from that regard. So in Shloka 1, Krishna will describe this fundamental ignorance of our true nature. As I said earlier, we all take a certain birth, but somewhere along the lines, of course, we have forgotten our true nature, that, we are of a higher nature, and we are taking birth only to fulfill certain goals or certain desires that we all have, right? So, this first shloka is like in the form of an Anubandha Chatushtaya, you might say, which is normally what is covered in any text, right? It's a curriculum. For example, it lists, like in the shloka 1, it talks about what is the subject matter of this chapter, and then who is the right student who is qualified to study this chapter, what is the goal of the chapter, and the relationship of the subject who is studying and the final goal. So this is what we call as the Anubandha Chatushtaya. Anubandha Chatushtaya is, all this, which is, one is what is the subject matter, what is the quality of the student, what is the goal, and the connection between what the student is looking for, the purpose. So the connection of the student with the goal. So that he will say in this particular shloka, which is the first shloka, he will say that, the matter what is being studied, of course, is Brahma Vidya, or the knowledge of the Brahman. And then one who is a Muni, one who is a contemplative mind, is the right student who is fit to study this chapter. And then he will give the final goal, which is, the highest which we can hope for, which is liberation really from this, from all this desires and everything, which is creating actually more and more problems for us, right? So that he will explain, and then ultimately the connection of the student to the goal, which is when I realize that ultimately Brahman is my really higher nature, okay, then that goal is attained. So that is we call as the purpose or the prayojanam, which is the fourth aspect of the Anubandha Chatushtaya, which really establishes the relationship of the matter of this particular of this chapter to the final goal. So, but before we start, you will see, before we get into those gunas and aspect, you will see how, Krishna will repeat the statement which he makes consistently about in everything, the reason why this is brought about again is because, as we know, and like I remember when I used to go to Toastmasters or, public speaking, one thing that would always be said is if you're talking about a certain concept, you say the concept once, that you're going to talk about it, and then you finally actually speak of the concept and then finally finish off by referring to that concept. So this repetition is kind of an importance aspect, and Krishna will actually do that as well. Okay, so just to give you a background. So we'll start with the shloka. Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Param Bhuyah Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam. Param Bhuyah Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam. Yajñātvā munayah sarve. Yajñātvā munayah sarve. Param siddhimito gataha. Param siddhimito gataha. So, you see, the chapter is beginning with Lord Krishna's again, voluntary effort, offer to teach further. So, in the 13th chapter, Arjuna asked the question, and therefore Krishna answered. But here we are finding that Arjuna is not raising any question at all, but Krishna is offering an answer mainly because he feels that, the repetition is needed. So he is, out of his own compassion, he's doing that. So one may ask, why Arjuna must have understood all this, right? So why should Krishna really ask this again? Is it because he wants to, kind of lengthen the chapters or, bring one more chapter? But it is not really that. He is doing that because he wants to ensure that this knowledge is truly understood. So he says, Param Bhuya Pravakshyami. I shall speak again of the supreme knowledge, which is the best of all knowledges. Again and again, because for all of us, sometimes, we see people, for example, having gone through a certain subject matter and having received a master's and a PhD, they're not satisfied. They want to do another PhD and another PhD and another PhD, right? So we are only gaining more and more a knowledge of a thing, right? It's knowledge of chemistry, knowledge of economics, knowledge of commerce. I want to do more and more of that. But when am I ever going to spend the time to really understand the knowledge? Okay, so that is where he's coming from, which is let's understand what is the knowledge. So that is why Param Bhuya Pravakshyami. I shall speak of that supreme knowledge, the best of all knowledge, and yat jnatva. By realizing that, Munaya Sarve, the person who is a munihi, okay, who really has the right knowledge here. So, param siddhim ita gataha. That person will reach that aspect of it. So this is, he's trying to say, the knowledge will lead to the ultimate state of union with the Supreme Brahman. So you see that Anubandha Chatushtaya, everything is said here. The what is the goal, what kind of student, what is the prayojanam, all these are given in these two aspects of it, two reasons of, which Krishna is telling Arjuna. First, he wants to make sure that Arjuna will understand the sadhana that is needed for the quest by giving the word munihi, and then second thing is it will help him to see clearly how he became deluded at the very outset of the battle. So the root of delusion will be given in this chapter itself. So Varham Siddhim Gataha. So this is, what I said earlier, which is the power of repetition. So Bhagavan Shankaracharya, he says that whenever the subject matter is very subtle, very, very subtle in this particular case, right? It's not a knowledge which I'll be able to easily figure it out, but it's very subtle. A teacher has to repeat this again and again. So when the matter is very shallow, I need not repeat it. For example, if I have to discuss, how a candy looks or how a candy tastes, I don't have to say much at all. But for a knowledge like this one, it needs to really penetrate through every cell of my body, which is to understand, because I have uh, spent so many lives being so ignorant of who I am that I need this repetition again and again and again. Like they say, when you have to have a habit really get into you, you have to do it about 90 days non-stop. Only then you can make a small change in your, a change in the habit, right? So very important here. And so Krishna says, Bhuya Pravakshyami, I shall once again give you the same teaching which I've said before. And what is the teaching? It is Param Uttamam Jnanam. There is no other thing that one needs to really go. In many ways, there is Bhadi, finally I've reached my destination. I don't have to do anything else. If we can come to that state, by knowing that I can spend the rest of my days only at the feet of the Lord, and only by learning this knowledge, so much of mental tension is already over, you know. No more stress, no more thing for all of us, right? So it is really the greatest, Param Uttamam Jnanam. It is the greatest of knowledge. So in the commentary, Shankaracharya, he uh, gives this, he says, if at all you have any doubt about what is the highest knowledge, he says, this is the greatest knowledge. It is the subtlest of knowledge, and it is the highest of knowledge. This is the most important that we really need to know, by realizing which we have reached the highest stage. It's something which is the Paravidya. And then what is the result of this one? He says finally it is moksha. So naturally, we'd like to know what is really moksha. I mean, even though we think we've understood what is moksha, we keep coming back again and again and again to understand what this moksha is. So he gives this aspect of how it is that which even at the highest form of a human being, which is a munihi, so muni literally means a sannyasi, and the word sannyasi indicates what? It basically indicates complete detachment, right? Detachment from the world. And this word detachment itself indicates a sadhana, you know. So Munaya means those seekers who have got all the necessary qualifications in abundance. And in our last 13th chapter also, in some form, this had come about, which is, and this is something we can use even for ourselves as a kind of a metric or a barometer to understand what does it mean? How do I become a munihi? Do I become a munihi by just giving up everything and reducing my wants and all that. Yes, that is also one thing. But there is one of the Swamis, he says there are four things which really qualifies you to be a Muni, and they are discrimination, dispassion, discipline, and lack of desire. So, to be able to discriminate between what is real and what is unreal, having detachment or dispassion, and then having a discipline to know what it is and to go towards it, and then finally having a desire for moksha. So, one who has all these qualifications would be called as a Muni. So, Muni does not, like I said, refer to just the external appearance, but it is more the internal. Internally, how are we acting in this world? So, that is where what a Muni is, who a Muni is. And by reaching that state of a Muni, what is it that we can get? So, he says, Param Siddhim Gataha, one who has attained moksha, which is highly this one, gaining which that alone is really the highest goal for having taken this physical body. And that so that is shloka number 1. Any questions or any thoughts before we go to shloka 2? I think we can try to do 2 as well. So in the second shloka, which is again continuation of the introduction, he continues to give us more ideas about this. You know, so let's see shloka number 2. Idam jnanam upashritya, idam jnanam upashritya, mama sadharmyagmagataha. मम साधर्म्यमागताः सर्गेऽपि नोपजायन्ते सर्गेऽपि नोपजायन्ते प्रलये न व्यथन्ति च प्रलये न व्यथन्ति च. So the next question, probably might come about is really what is then something we have come across this terminologies before too, is what is really Jivan Mukti and what is Videha Mukti. So you see here Krishna is trying to explain that aspect of it. So he briefly defines him as idam jnanam upashritya. By taking advantage of this knowledge, by acquiring this knowledge, mama sadharmya agataha. So the seekers have attained this oneness with me. So just by this understanding this knowledge, living this knowledge, the seeker have already attained this, and they have attained this Ishwar Swarupam, we can say, by dropping the Jivatman. So Mama Sadharmyam. Mama Sadharmyam means Ishvara Swarupam. So Krishna is saying, my nature, that is me, can be attained by this. So what do we mean by this? What do we mean by this? Mama Sadharmyam. Mama Sadharmyam, which he says is really this Ishvara Swarupa. So when we think about Ishvara, right? Who is that Ishvara? Ishvara is that complete Purnatvam. Maybe in my next session, I will actually put one shloka which talks about really the full qualities of Ishvara. Ishvara has everything in Purnam, and this Purnatvam, uh, we can also enjoy that if I have completely understood this knowledge. So this is really the first indication of who is a Jivan Mukti. Jivan Mukti is attaining that moksha even when I am alive. So that total inner sense of, you would call that a self-sufficiency. So that is, Krishna says, even in the second chapter, Krishna says, Atmanyeva Atmana Tushtaha. So Krishna, Bhagavan is ever Purnam, ever. So this jnani can also enjoy that complete Purnatvam, is what he says. Idam jnanam upashratya mama sadharmya magataha. So Krishna is trying to say upashratya. Upashratya meaning taking refuge in this knowledge. This would be this one. So, and then second line, Sargepi nopajayante pralaye na vyatanti cha. Birth and death are not chance events, but they are predetermined, by a karma. But in order to work off this karma, we have accumulated, we keep taking this birth here. And so he says, once I take knowledge, once I take support of this knowledge, and those who have reached me, those who have partake me of my essential nature, this Ishvara Swarupam, they are neither born at the time of creation, nor do they suffer pain during dissolution. So we're talking about pralaya and everything here. And I think that will need a little more discussion. So we will continue that in the next session. Okay.
Hari Om.
Yeah, Anand,
Yeah,
please.
one question. So one can have the mix of the qualities, right? Sattva, Rajas, Tamo.
Yes. So here, of course, we all are a mixture of qualities, right? But the greater amount of sattva in us will force us to seek out the company of, better people in our lives, or doing things, activities which are conducive towards reaching moksha. So even though we may be born with different qualities, but our aim throughout our life is to increase the amount of sattvic qualities.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other discussion or thought? So this chapter is a very interesting chapter, and possibly, I was thinking we'll have probably some activities as well, because it's so very, it's all about what Anand just asked this question, where am I with my own Sattva-Rajas Tamas, and what activity can I do in order to improve my Sattva? How do I really, become detached and view the world of people with whom I'm surrounded with? And, how can I really practice the witness principle? So these are all the things that will come up in this chapter really well. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ